I should introduce myself. I'm Alex Martin, and I am currently living on the road. I'm filming this from Sedona, Arizona, and today is day 44 since I left Florida. I think running through my story and how I got to where I am today will really tell you a lot about my creative process, just some of my life goals, how I've shifted between parts of my different careers, and really put me down this road literally coming onto the current road trip that I'm on that for the foreseeable future might not even come to an end. I like to tell people that I am a writer at heart. I have almost always been an author. Back in 2004, I read Christopher Paolini's Aragon. And from that point forward, I was like, I was 11 years old. And I told myself, if he is young, he was 15 when he wrote it. And, at the time that I read it, I think he was 19 or 20. And I was like, he was a young author when he wrote that. I can do something like that too. And I got to writing on June 12th, 2004. I graduated from sixth grade and I started writing by hand with a pen on just like a little flip tablet of paper, my very first book. That first book would become a series of 3 books. I didn't actually finish the series. This was, I was a kid writing all this and I was getting older and older and older as the years went on. And I was like kind of starting to realize, this isn't really the kind of story I want to tell. The first 3 books I wrote were very much a very shoot 'em up aliens and battles and space travel and cool planets and stuff. But, I called them my video game books. There wasn't much substance to them. They were kind of just a fun way for me to really express my creative outlet as a kid and into being a teenager, and going through high school. But it wasn't until I hit college that I got serious about writing and am currently working on a series that I like to say is the story I have to tell. When I say this is the story I have to tell, I mean that this book series will probably be the only story I write from book 1 to the final book. I have had other creative endeavors with writing where I've kind of like written chapters for other books, especially in the fantasy genre. I've written some like nonfiction, or at least some twist on nonfiction where like it takes parts of my life or just like even memoirs of some sort. But I never really see those through to fruition. Whereas the science fiction series that I've been working on since 2013, I have been putting out books on a regular pace, and my next one comes out in October. What really got me into writing this series uh, was in 2012. I wrote a short story, or my, 20-year-old perception of a short story, and I submitted it to a magazine. I forget what the magazine was at this point, but they came back to me and they said it felt more like the section of a novel, and to frame it as a short story and resubmit it. Me being me, I kind of took that suggestion and ran the other direction with it. I did continue writing it as a novel. I took the characters in the story and I built like sort of a trilogy out of it in my head. I took the characters and I, put them into this other world and I literally wrote the first chapter of the first book. Um, like literally, it was like 41 or 42 times. During all of that, I failed out of college and at the end of December, I went through some very dark stuff. I won't say for YouTube. But writing this first book from start to finish became an anchor emotionally and helped me get through a lot of stuff I was going through at that time. I wrote the first draft in 10 days. It was 151,000 words. And by the time I was finished editing it, it was 75,000 words. This science fiction series very much became something that I use to express my emotions, something that I use to express my wanderlust. Uh, I like to do a lot of research in terms of travel for different places around the world, see how I can, build environments on different planets using real environments here on Earth, but also looking at, especially for one particular planet, looking at how do people experience these spaces, especially for the second book, because the characters are cataloging uh, one of the planets in the second book. I did a lot of research and, I wrote out equations, and I very much put my heart and soul in research and talking with other scientists and people who are knowledgeable on uh, the environment and ecosystems and functions, and just did a lot for that book. To put it simply, it's a very research heavy, detailed book. I was also reading Game of Thrones at the time, so where I was reading like John Green for the first book, which has a very young adult story feel to it. The second book has a very Game of Thronesy kind of feel to it, a lot lighter content, not nearly as heavy, but you can definitely see that the longer format story became how I told the second book. During all of that, I wrote a website, or I put together a website for the book, and I went into the background of some of the planets and like the different scientific organizations in the book, and just I wrote out the physics and made a whole post about how they travel interstellar distances in the time that they do, and things like the barrier law, and put all that together. And that website kind of became the basis for what would later become a blog, and that blog would later turn into a YouTube series. And that YouTube series, uh, at first it was just me, and then I was like, what if I start interviewing people on the street? At this point, it was early 2018. I had just, I'm going to say lost my job, but it wasn't really losing my job. The job shut down. I was working at a mall, doing engraving on like, glasses and watches and stuff. And that shut down. And for about a month and a half, I was unemployed. And so I kind of used my open time to start doing YouTube videos about different uh, concepts in science. That was kind of jogged by one day I was doing laundry in my apartment in Savannah, Georgia, and I saw a bunch of lines of light coming out of the bathroom door. I was like, what the heck is going on? And so I dropped my laundry, and I just like started playing around with the door and like trying to figure out why these lines of light were coming through, and eventually figured out it had a bunch of stuff. It had to do with the light bulbs and the number of light bulbs and the angle that the door was at. Made a whole video about it. I was popular on Tumblr back then, so I like made a Tumblr post about it. Um, that really kicked off that YouTube series. And a few months later in July is when let me go back to April is when I started interviewing people for the YouTube series. People would come up, we talk about concepts and kind of guide them through a little lesson, make a video out of it. And then in July, I was starting to notice that lots of people during these interviews would gather around and like watch the interview, and we'd have like some small science experiments. And that's when I realized like, these videos are taking up a lot of my time. What if I don't do videos? What if I drop that format and I start doing science experiments with people on the sidewalk? I'm not going to say that I'm the first person to do this. I'm nowhere near. There's plenty of people around the country, around the world, who set up science experiments in parks and cities, especially with sidewalk astronomy. It's a big thing. People doing that in cities around the world. It's nothing new. But I started doing it a lot. In Savannah, it started at like 3 days, then went to 4 days, and 5 days a week. And I had a table, I had science experiments, and just let people stop by. In Savannah, I was getting about 500 people a day during tourist season, and then that drastically slowed down after school came back into session. What I remember thinking is I need somewhere that I can do this year round, where, Savannah does get cold. And actually, when I was living there in early 2018, June 3rd, 2018, it snowed in Savannah for the first time in 54 years. But it does get cold in Savannah. I was like, no one's going to be coming out, December, January, February. And at the time, my sister was going to school in Florida, and, she needed a roommate. So I was going through some stuff in Savannah, the roommate I had at the time, and was like, you know what, I'm going to move down to Florida. I know it's going to be warm. I can do this year round. There's different towns and playgrounds I can do this at. So I picked up, moved to Florida. And looking back at, I'm going to say everything happens for a reason, but looking back, moving to Florida got me stuck. I love Savannah. I wish I didn't have to leave. Moving to Florida financially trapped me in the state. With the cost of living, particularly after COVID, when everything was skyrocketing. My rent went up from 1,500 to 2,600 in 3 years, and kind of glaze over this part, but I was living with someone and I was not paying rent with that person because I had a different apartment where it was super expensive. And then I ended up getting a house with a different roommate, whole bunch of stuff. Not gonna go into that now right now. I got trapped financially. I was not making a lot of money. I was a teacher in Florida at the time. I was still doing the science experiments in sidewalk astronomy at the time, and about 150 events a year, then 200 events a year, then almost 300 events a year last year. I was making, well, first of all, I have student debt, I have other bills. My expenses were probably close to 2,500 a month, 2,900 a month maybe, and I was only making just over 3,000, and that wears on you a lot. Combine that with failing relationships, combine that with just being bored in general. Um, I'm being a hiker, being someone who loves the outdoors. Florida was just boring to me. It was hot. I don't mind rain, but it's flat terrain and everywhere you go is the same terrain. Uh, before I left Florida, I went to the Everglades out of obligation. I keep saying out of obligation because I knew after I left, I probably wouldn't go back. So I just had to get the Everglades out of the way. It was more of a check the list off kind of thing. It probably took about 6 months for me to realize I made a mistake by going to Florida. It's worked out so far, but I got stuck. I got restless. I got resentful. I got just in a bad mental state constantly. I enjoyed what I did doing my sidewalk astronomy and sidewalk science. I did get to travel here and there, but being stuck in Florida as someone who loves mountains, being stuck in Florida as someone who loves snow and cold air and cold streams and lakes and things where you can actually go swimming in too. Um, because there's alligators in every pond everywhere around Florida. But then the darker side, there's the mental side where I want all these other things that are not in Florida. But the truth about Florida is, despite saying that we are extremely biodiverse and we have lots of nature and our beaches are beautiful and stuff like that, in my opinion, it's mostly a lie. It's a gimmick to get people to move to Florida. It does not help with the politics that are currently going on in the country and the polarization. And so people who move to Florida tend to be of a certain political lean. And also the rampant deforestation, the rampant draining of wetlands, the utter lack of care for nature in what's supposed to be one of the best states in the country for nature. The state has turned into just cookie cutter houses, and we had 3 hurricanes last year, and there were whole communities that were built on watersheds and in wetlands, and those houses were underwater for a week. And Florida insurance doesn't cover it. The hurricanes that we got, I lived 5 miles from Hurricane Milton, where it hit land. I was 5 miles north of that. That's not the reason I wanted to leave Florida. I wanted to leave Florida for years. Years. After I got out of the relationship I was in, after 2 years, I went on a 6,000-mile road trip to Arizona last year in 2024. And part of that road trip was a conference for rural STEM education, and met lots of people, stayed in contact with a few of them. Great trip. Got to see most of the state of Arizona. Later, it's kind of funny story. When I was teaching high school before I went on that trip, a couple of my students showed me a picture. They're like, "Where is this?" And they showed it to me, and I'm like, "I'll go there. I'll go there for you." Horseshoe Bend, which was 150 miles out of the way from where I was going to be. But I went. I went for my students, and kind of the funny thing is I ended up meeting a guy there who I became friends with, and in August we actually went on a trip across Utah together. So my student showing me that picture in class a month later got me to go to Horseshoe Bend, where I met that guy, which then got me to go to Utah, which is more or less where the hiking astronomer identity was born, was in that period. And so it was kind of fun. That was a big part of the summer. I got to travel for 5 weeks last summer. In December, I reached out to one of the people I met at the conference in June last year. Just saying, like, is there anything that we can collaborate on, or is there anything I can do in Arizona when I come out again next year? And she actually got me in contact with a few people who then invited me to speak at some conferences in Idaho. And I got paid for it. So this is where the seed was planted. In January of 2025, I knew I was going to Idaho. And having traveled for 5 weeks in 2024, I wanted to get an even longer trip going. And I was like, you know what, let's do like 100 days, end up being 111 days with the plan, and like go around the whole country, like do the Arizona thing, do the Idaho thing, and then go from there. So the plan was, leave Florida for the summer, which is always a good idea. If you know the area, leaving Florida for the summer is the way to go. You don't want to be there. It pours down rain all the time. It's extremely hot. Temperatures well above 100 with the humidity. And that's just in the middle of Florida. That's not even like South Florida. But so I knew I was going to be gone. I knew I wanted to do this trip. I have always wanted to live in the Pacific Northwest. I saw 2 solar eclipses from there. I love the area. I love the waterfalls. I love the hiking and the mountains and the cold and the snow and the trees and just, I love that environment. And I hate Florida's environment. Florida, to me, is just this, it's becoming this monoculture of cookie cutter houses and drained everything, deforested everything, smack to the face of wildlife. And it's very difficult for me to live there. I'm just not someone who fits there, and you can't make me appreciate it. Like, I appreciate Florida, but I don't love Florida. So in February, I was like, let's make this the move. Let's go to the PNW. This is it. This is the moment. It's kind of funny because I called my sister and we were talking, and then I got quiet for a second. And she goes, you know, you got quiet. You're either moving to Oregon, you got a new girlfriend, or you won the lottery. That's what she said. And I was like, how'd you got on the first guess? Like, how do you know? It's like, right now moving to Oregon is the plan. Like I think that's what I want to do with this opportunity. I'm getting, skipping forward a few months, coming up to May, I start the road trip. May 19th, I have my telescopes, everything I need to live in my car, little Kia Soul, as I'm going on this road trip. The longer I go, the more I'm like, wait a second. Why do I want to move? I think the question I was asking myself for a lot of this road trip up until 1 or 2 weeks ago was, why do I want to stop paying rent in Florida just to immediately start paying rent in Oregon or Washington? Why would I want I struggle financially living in Florida. Why would I want to perpetuate that for now when I could just live on the road and be able to travel, do my photography, and most importantly, do sidewalk astronomy, which I already do 5-6 days a week. I can do that on the road and make plenty of money. And so that got me looking for vans and just like researching like what to do for van conversions. And I think that's what I am going to do. I have something lined up when I go down to Phoenix next week. I'm going to be looking at a van, and if it's all in good order, purchase it. And for now, just do a minimal conversion, just something I can use, something I can live out of, Nothing big and fancy. I don't need, it's just a little Ford Transit Connect. I just need something that can primarily, I need to make sure I have space and storage for the telescope and the equipment I have and the stock for photography and my books. So I do have things with me. Like there's a sizable amount of stuff I have with me that my little Kia Soul, blessed soul, that it manages to carry for me. Um, but I think in some way I can make this work. At first, it was just supposed to be leaving Florida for the summer. Then it was supposed to be moving to the PNW. And now it's, what if I just live on the road for a while? Could be a year, could be 2, 3 years. I don't know. I enjoy it. The traveling aspect is fantastic. So far, doing it out of the soul, it's been cheap as anything. I've spent in 40 on today's day 44. I've spent less than $3,000 in 44 days, which I don't know if that sounds like a lot or little, but at the same time, I was still paying rent. Like part of that 3K is rent for June. I was still paying rent even though I wasn't living there. So 1,700. I've spent, let's say 2K. I've spent $2,000 in 44 days, including gas. And when I get this van, I won't be driving as much. I'll be, in one spot for longer. I won't be spending as much money on gas. To me, as someone who never spends time in the houses that they live in, because I am always gone. I'm always at a coffee shop. I'm always on the street corner. I'm always doing something outside the house. I use the house to sleep and shower. I can shower at gyms or get a hotel for a night once or twice a week if I have to. But it's like sleeping, that's the main thing is where to sleep. I have my camping gear, but I'm not always going to be in a spot where I can camp, like set up a tent. If I'm traveling for an extended period of time, I don't want to have to be setting everything up in the dark all the time. So having a van is just a smarter, more efficient option in the long term. There are some things I have to get figured out. Like, okay, I get the van. What do I do with my car? I still have a $13,000 loan on my car. What am I supposed to do about it? No one's paying 13K for a 2016 Soul that I have put 50,000 miles on in 2 years. That'd be nice, but it's not going to happen. I've already looked everything up. I can get maybe 6 to 7, maybe. So I have to figure stuff like that out. Um, I already own solar. It's like right behind me. I have 500 watts of solar already. I have about 4,300 watts of watt hours of solar storage. I don't need to make those massive investments for solar energy. I have all that. I know how to use it. I know how to work it. It's fine. That's a big. I know it's a big part of camper vans. So like figuring out a different installation process might be a trickier thing. I already use solar a sizable amount, and especially living on the road like I have been for the past 44 days, minus a couple hotels here and there. Um, I it works out just fine, even if it's cloudy. Like I have plenty of storage. So there will be some updates. I'm going to continue this. That's how I got here. Writing books, to making that website, to starting the YouTube videos, to interviewing people, to doing science on tables, to sidewalk astronomy. There was teaching in there. There was working on a museum and planetarium in there. There's a candy shop in there. River Street Sweets in Savannah. Tutoring. I've worked a dozen jobs in the past 7 years, but teaching science and doing educational activities on the sidewalk has been the constant in the past 7 years. This is how I make money now. And it's working. Still have to get, there's always another level, another tier I have to achieve in order to make it sustainable in the long term. But in the short term, it's sustainable. I know how much I can get. I know what different cities I can do in different cities, but this is where I'm at. With photography on the side of that, with writing books on the side of that, I sell all those So I'm making a decent amount of money each month and can do some future videos where I'm like listing out expenses and income and stuff and show you, here's how much I'm spending as I live on the road. Here's how much I'm making as I live on the road. And it's not going to be as much as other people who do remote work. And it's going to be a little bit more crowded because I do have a lot of physical space that's going to be taken up from the telescopes and stuff. So, whereas it's not just a laptop. The whole new journey.